Hello, this is Jack Anthony, and this is a video summary of part one of three essay I wrote in support of the National Space Defense Center called Put to the Test of Your Foundations, Suddenly and Unexpectedly. It's based on the foundations of mission operations which guide the amazing people of Johnson Space Center. These have been around a long time, and they're very important as a foundation of what they do for human spaceflight. It's the second principle of these interconnected principles that I have built a series of articles around, 3 articles so far, to always be aware that suddenly and unexpectedly we may find ourselves in a role where our performance has ultimate consequences. Let's press on. This article was written about Steve Bales, who was the Guido flight controller for the Apollo 11 landing. And he was supported by a guy named Jack Garman, who was 24 years old at the time. Steve was 27 when Apollo landed on the moon. And Jack had a team of experts in the back room. Now, back at MIT, Margaret Hamilton was one of the many big brains there who wrote the software for the lunar module. So these are the key players, and we're going to focus on Steve Bales. Okay, so here's the story. In the last 3 months before Apollo 11, Steve Bales and his team would take part in many training simulations. Many times things did not go well, but lessons were learned. In one simulation, the lunar module computer started to spit out alarms. Codes like 1201, 1202 would pop up, and the crew would ask, "What's up with this alarm?" Well, the guys were dumbfounded. So Mr. Krantz challenged them to learn the codes and be able to assess what they mean and whether they should keep going or abort the landing. Steve turned to Jack Garman and his backroom team, who reached back to MIT, and they prepared an amazing job aid to help Steve on the evening of 20 July 1969 when Apollo 11's Eagle would go for the landing. This little job aid had all the codes and what to do. It was sort of a summary that Steve could have at his crew position. Now, what they were looking for on the computer, the astronauts would call out alarms. In this illustration, you see 1202, okay? So now let's get ready to have Apollo 11 land on the moon. So after Eagle undocked from Columbia and was on the back side of the moon, getting set for the powered descent to landing, Mr. Krantz, Gene Krantz, spoke to his team and shared his faith in them and their dedication and readiness. Steve's heart was pounding and his hands were sweating. The Guido would be the go, no-go shot caller, monitoring the descent trajectory and computer as Armstrong and Aldrin descended to the lunar surface. So everybody was ready. So there's Steve, and there's the back room, and here is Steve at his console, looking very prepared and quite dapper. So what happened was, I'm going to tell you what happens, and then we're going to play an audio tape, and you're going to hear many different loops, discussions going on at the critical phase when they started to hear these alarms. So let me give you a summary, and then we'll play the audio. Eagle was descending to the Sea of Tranquility, and the trajectory was a little bit off, too much down rate, but within limits. Steve was galvanized on his screen, checking data coming from Eagle and the computer. Mr. Krantz would periodically perform controller polls, asking him, "Are you go?" And Steve would respond in a very high-pitched voice, and he bellowed, "Go." And you'll hear that in the tape. Then, suddenly and unexpectedly, the crew reports alarms, and Steve console showed that. 1201 alarm, then 1202. Neil Armstrong asked, "Give us a reading on that alarm." Steve had Jack in his ear on the voice loop, guiding him along, and Steve was able to keep calling out the go. They understood the alarms and they knew that the computer was just falling behind a little, but it would catch up. There were more alarms, but the call was, we're go on that alarm. Steve held himself together and kept things on track, calling the go, and ultimately Eagle landed safely. Let's listen in for about a minute and listen closely.
We have another 1202 around. Roger, no sweat. 1202, we copy it. How you doing? We look good here. Oh, got you. We have another 1202 around. 32 degrees.
Well, ultimately, you know that the famous radio transmission, Houston, Tranquility Base here, the Eagle has landed, was uttered by Neil Armstrong. Steve Garman's role and performance that afternoon on 20 July 1969 had ultimate consequences, and mankind, for the first time ever, was on the moon. And Steve got a lot of help from the folks in the back room, led by Jack Garman, and he was prepared thanks to the good help from the MIT people like Margaret Hamilton. Here's a cool picture, my favorite picture from Apollo 11. That's Neil Armstrong reflected in Buzz Aldrin's visor. So that's really cool how that worked out. Neil had the camera and got this really cool picture. Well, of course it had a happy ending, and here's Steve Bales with his mom and dad back in Ottumwa, Iowa, which the character Radar in the TV series MASH was from. I bet you knew that. So anyway, that was probably taken right after the mission when Steve was home telling his mom and dad what a wild ride it was being a flight controller for Apollo 11, and Steve did a great job. So the bottom line is the paper I wrote takes the tenant to always be aware that suddenly and unexpectedly we may find ourselves in a role where our performance has ultimate consequences. And what's important about that, whether you're a space defense crew member as a guardian of the high frontier, or just about any other important role on a team, it may come down to you, and you'll be prepared through preparation, study, and faith in your team and yourself. So that's what the paper's all about. I had a lot of people help me, proofreading, learning, researching. I want to thank Bill Foster of NASA for helping me, and Kevin Chilton, Willie Shelton, Doug Lavero, Nick Combs. My brother Daryl helped proof the paper. He's a pretty good proofer, actually. He's amazing. And then Brent Scrihart, who was a NASA person a while ago. Now he works in the National Space Defense Center. Well, 9 minutes. That was a little longer than I thought, but I hope you enjoyed it.